Hello and many thanks for joining us. You're watching ID's News Hour from the Ethiopian Broadcasting Corporation. With the news, I'm Tabitha John. Do stay with us. Eritrean refugees living in Addis Ababa held rallies protesting terrorist TPLF's atrocities against refugees being sheltered in Tigray. Demonstrators demanded the UN Commission for Refugees to break silence and find an immediate response. Goshu Melliso has more.
Eritrean refugees fled from Hitsas and Shimelba camps based in Tigray region in fear of imminent danger posed by the terrorist TPLF rebels group. They said scores of Eritrean refugees were becoming victims of the brutal TPLF attack in recent days. Protesting such inhuman attacks, refugees held demonstrations in front of United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. According to the refugees, over 500 people were missed and some 20 have been killed by the TPLF group. Refugees call on UNHCR to break silence and be part of the solution.
Several Eritrean refugees were killed by TPLF in Tigray. In Hitsas and Shimelba camps, refugees are suffering from imprisonment, killing and other physical abuses. We are requesting the international community to give a swift response. There are more than 24,000 refugees in Tigray, but there is no medical service, on top of the heavy artillery deployed in the shelter. TPLF looted vehicles, warehouses, other facilities and the food. More than 4,000 refugees forced to flee after the ceasefire declared.
I have lived over 5 years in a refugee camp. Yet, TPLF attacked the refugee camp recently, which caused injuries in women and children. We are forced to be displaced from our camp and we faced a lot of problems. We ask the pertinent body to seek a solution.
We came here to change our life, but not to beg for wheat. Since TPLF is in a dire situation, they looted even our dough, which was ready to be baked. They also killed 1-year-old child brutally.
Coordinator of the rally, Mituku Digafe, for his part said the very purpose of this rally is to show the international community about the atrocities committed by TPLF forces against Eritrean refugees.
Nobody could hear us. We urge the international community or others to hear our voice. TPLF has been looting and killing our people by knocking our doors. We have suffered a lot, over 20 people killed by bomb in one day. They also ambush and kill refugees.
It is to be recalled that US Department of State has urged TPLF to stop attacks and intimidation against Eritrean refugees.
Eritrean refugees sheltered in Tigray request for transfer to safer places as abuses orchestrated by the terrorist TPLF group escalate in the region. Talking to ETV, the Agency for Refugee and Returnee Affairs, ARA, stated that it has been striving to relocate the refugees to give a lasting solution to Eritrean refugees. Jerusalem Betha has more.
Currently, Ethiopia is home to more than 900,000 refugees, mainly from neighboring South Sudan, Somalia, Eritrea, and Sudan. Thousands of Eritrean refugees live in 4 camps and outside of camps in Tigray state, but currently the refugee camps are reportedly being attacked by TPLF. UN and the United States government have now confirmed the atrocities being committed on the Eritrean refugees in Tigray. Particularly, the U.S. State Department spokeswoman Jelena Porter called on Tuesday for the intimidation and attacks to stop. Defying international immigration law, the terrorist group has been killing, robbing, raping, and abducting the refugees sheltered in various parts of the region. That's why some Eritrean refugees who live in Mayaini and Adi Harush camps have been requesting for transfer into other safer places. The refugees have been appealing to the international community to help them relocate to safer places. It's to be recalled.
The TPLF militias have been attacking us in different ways. Some of our friends are killed, robbed and kidnapped by the terrorist group TPLF.
ህወሓት ነው የተገደሉት የስደተኞች የኤርትራ ስደተኞች
Eritrean refugees are here, have been killed, kidnapped by TPLF. Even we don't know to some our friends where they are. We call on the international community to help us.
ወደ የተሻለ ቦታ ለመውጣት እንፈልጋለን እባካችሁ
ስደተኞች ላይ የሚፈጸመው ያለው ግፍ
Previously, different atrocities being committed on the Eritrean refugees in Tigray, particularly Hezaz and Shimelba, Eritrean refugees campus by TPLF terrorist group. Similarly, this clique has been attacking us here in Adi Harush and Mayani camps. We call on the global community to give attention for our concern.
Talking to ETV, the Agency for Refugees and Returnees Affairs stated that it has received different reports regarding attacks on Eritrean refugees by the terrorist TPLF clique.
What we hear from different sources and what we gather from different information sources is that shows us that there are some security threats and there are some serious allegations, that the serious reports that reflect some incidents that are bad. For example, some of them are telling us that they are being searched and they are being viewed by TPLF forces as not civilians but as a target. So where they fear that if they go back, they might be attacked, and they feel that their families would be in danger if they remain in that area.
Therefore, the government is exerting efforts to relocate the refugees to Dabat town in Amara regional state to give a lasting solution to Eritrean refugees, Tesfaun said.
We as government have taken their concerns seriously, and we had tried to find a new location. We identified a certain site in North Gondar zone of Dabat Woreda. It's called Alamwaj, and we found 91 hectares of land that's suitable for camp. But now, due to change of circumstances, we are forced to make our response as swift as possible. And we have arranged a scenario in which we can transport some refugees that are already out of the camps in different directions. And we are also working with UNHCR to realize that this camp can resume service soon. So we have also requested the Woreda administration to be kind and to give us shelter temporarily in schools in Dabat town.
Though the government has been working hard to fulfill its obligation to ensure the safety of refugees, but humanitarian organizations were not providing the necessary service for the refugees as promised, Tesfaun said.
Despite Ethiopia's declaration of a ceasefire and TPLF's provocative assaults on civilians amidst conflict, the West continues to play a game of double standards on Tigray's issue. In fact, people argue that US President Joe Biden's policy on Ethiopia is both misguided and counterproductive. The armed group is escalating its violence by attacking regional states, while at the same time killing civilians and forcibly recruiting children to use them as soldiers. But the likes of the US, as well as the international community in general, continue to hide in dead silence. Shivarao Lago takes us through the rest of the reportage on why the US in particular remains misguided. Here he goes.
In his article featured on Foreign Policy News, Dr. Darasa Getachew Kasa walks the readers through America's policies on Africa and Ethiopia. Africa is often considered as an afterthought when it comes to the U.S. foreign policy architecture. That happened to be the case even when the first black president of America, whose father hailed from Kenya, was elected. In fact, through the Obama years, U.S. assistance to promote democracy, human rights, and good governance (DRG) initiatives did not even account for 5% of the general aid in the most populous nations of Africa. In this connection, Jeff Pierce says the Western are still paying little attention to Africa.
look at what happened with the G7 meeting, where you have a snapshot of people and the caption says, they're discussing Tigray, the Tigray situation. Is there one representative for Ethiopia in the room? No. Is there one African in the room? No. So there's a bunch of white Western North Americans, one Canadian, the Prime Minister, and a bunch of Europeans all sitting around talking about a part of Africa, and they're going to try and resolve your problems for you. Doesn't anybody have a problem with that? Should somebody be, saying, hey, it's looking very white in that room? So that's my 2 cents for it.
The U.S. maintained strong ties to Meles Zenawi's government in Ethiopia. Some were even enamored by the doctrine of authoritarian developmentalism that Zenawi espoused. On his funeral in 2012, Susan Rice eulogized him, saying, quote, "He was uncommonly wise, able to see the bigger picture and the long game, even when others would allow immediate pressures to overwhelm sound judgment." This, while opposition party leaders were languishing in prison, journalists and activists were getting tortured. Washington misread Zenawi's ethnic chauvinism and iron-clad authoritarianism as a sign of strength. To quote from Rice, Meles had little patience for fools or idiots, as he liked to call them. Things went downhill on U.S.-Africa relations during the Trump era, who exerted diplomatic pressures on Ethiopia to sign a tripartite treaty on the management of the GERD. He even said Egypt could blow up the GERD, to the annoyance of Ethiopians across the nation.
To Ethiopian Americans and to Ethiopians alike and Africans as well, was really shocking. And it was also shocking for me, because bombing the dam, this is unheard of. This is unheard of, it's uncalled of, and also really, it really undermines the office of the presidency and even his own personal character.
Between 2018 and November 2020, the TPLF's leaders resorted to recruiting militia and special forces in the hundreds of thousands. Biden began to portray the TPLF as the victim of the crisis. The statements and press releases from the State Department were devoid of the history and context of the conflict and the role of the TPLF as the instigator. Most Western media outlets followed suit in this lopsided way of judging things in Ethiopia.
We're seeing an open admission by CNN saying, well, yes, we got the video of these soldiers supposedly shooting guys and tossing them off a cliff from Tigray Media House. And you're looking at this going, really? This is your source, and this is how you treat material from a source that is clearly with a biased political agenda, and what's worse is a ethnic propaganda network.
On July 12, 2021, the New York Times published a report of TPLF's march into Mekelle, where pictures of child soldiers bearing arms and marching were seen.
The world has had protocols and conventions on the use of children in armed conflict, which consider the use of children in any role related to a conflict prohibited under international law and defined by the International Criminal Court to be a war crime.
The writer says even more controversial and unhelpful is the U.S. position regarding the highly contested provinces of Wolqayt and Sagade. These provinces were said to have been annexed from Gondar into Tigray back in the late 1980s, when the TPLF had the upper hand in the struggle against the Derg. When it came into power in 1991, the areas of Wolqayt, Sagade, Raya, Waja and Humera were annexed to Tigray, using a map produced back in the bush by TPLF cartographers. The leaders of the Wolqayt movement were jailed, tortured, and assassinated by the TPLF for almost 3 decades until 2018. These provinces, the writer argues, also used to serve as TPLF's clandestine corridor into the Sudan, where arms and logistics was funneled into Tigray to fight the Derg. For the government, vacating these provinces therefore means throwing a lifeline for TPLF TPLF's armed resistance. If the US is indeed bracing to effect regime change, insisting on its responsibility to protect, it will have disastrous consequences for Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa and for Europe and the US, it was pointed out.
Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Affairs Minister Demeke Mekonnen held an online video conversation with Canadian Minister of Foreign Affairs Marc Garneau. During the discussion, Canadian Foreign Minister said his country expects an expedited improvement to the flow of humanitarian support into the Tigray region. Demeke said the decision of the federal government to declare a unilateral ceasefire was meant to address humanitarian concerns in the region. He said the TPLF has wasted the opportunity for peace under the ceasefire and chose to block humanitarian corridors and launch fresh attacks in Afar and Amhara regions. He expressed Ethiopia's concern over the failure of the international community to recognize the Ethiopian government's effort to create a conducive environment for humanitarian support, peace and stability in Tigray. The Deputy Prime Minister said Ethiopia expects the international community, including Canada, to force TPLF to respect the humanitarian ceasefire and condemn the group's destructive actions that continue to obstruct humanitarian support. The United Nations Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator Martin Griffiths started a 6-day visit to Ethiopia on Thursday. Quote-unquote, "It was important to me that I carry out my first official mission as the UN's humanitarian chief to Ethiopia," said Griffiths. During the visit, Griffiths is expected to meet with high-level government officials and representatives of the humanitarian and donor communities. He also plans to travel to the Tigray and Amhara regional states, according to a statement issued by the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA. Ethiopia and Switzerland signed agreement to avoid double taxation. The agreement was signed between Ethiopian Finance Minister Ahmed Shide and Ambassador of Switzerland in Ethiopia Tamara Mona. The deal is expected to encourage investors from Switzerland to invest in Ethiopia and Ethiopians interested to access Switzerland market or work with Swiss companies. The two countries have undertaken 3 rounds of negotiations before finally deciding to lift double taxation, which said has been a bottleneck in boosting business ties between the two countries. Foreign Affairs Ministry spokesperson Ambassador Dina Mufti briefed journalists on the latest diplomatic engagements. Dina said TPLF has continued discrediting the unilateral humanitarian ceasefire, endangering the people of Tigray and particularly farmers. According to the spokesperson, the terrorist group is launching fresh attacks in different areas bordering the region with Amhara and Afar, endangering the spirit of the ceasefire. Ambassador Dina calls on the international community to force TPLF to respect the ceasefire. The spokesperson also expressed the government's effort in facilitating the return of citizens from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Dina said the Ethiopian government allocated personnel and financial resources to provide the migrants with health care, feeding, psychosocial support, and physical safety. The spokesperson also noted about 42,000 people from Saudi Arabia have been repatriated. Last week, Ethiopians celebrated and showed their enthusiastic support for their National Defense Force with outpouring of words of love, appreciation, and respect. The Ethiopian National Defense Force is a designation formally reserved for the armed forces of the Ethiopian federal government. The political analyst, Professor Alemayo Gebramariam from the United States, says Ethiopia's history testifies that when Ethiopians are faced with disrespect, they respond with perseverance, resistance, vigilance, and defiance. The professor writes Ethiopia's heroic ancestors defended Ethiopia with their blood and sweat and made the enemy shed tears as they vanquished him. Listen to this. Youths in Ethiopia are said to be struggling to seek new ways of combating climate change. The British Council in Ethiopia, along with other environment-affiliated actors, hosted a Zoom discussion that brought together several environmental actors within Ethiopia and beyond. Kasahun Chani has more.
Ethiopian users working in a climate space discuss the state of climate action in Ethiopia with the high-level climate action champion for COP26, Joel Topping, and United Nations high-level climate action champion for COP25, Gonzalo Munoz. In the Zoom discussion organized by the British Council in Ethiopia and other environment actors, participants explored the many ways in which youth in Ethiopia are leading the way in combating climate change in the country. Bethlehem Dejani, the founder and CEO of Zafre Papers, which is introducing a clean tech paper solution by producing 100% tree-free and bleached paper pulp from agro waste. She said her company is striving to introduce eco-friendly, carbon-neutral, recyclable and non-toxic environment products.
I'm Nikki from Ethiopia, founder and CEO of Zafre Papers. So as a person who grew up surrounded by trees and a very refreshing environment, and coming across the fact that the paper industry alone takes the blame of 14% of the world's climate challenge we're facing currently was a very shocking experience for me. So with that in mind, Zafre was born, which is a company that makes 100% tree-free paper from agriculture waste. So we decided to work in a closed loop system, making sure that nothing goes to waste of Zafre, and also making sure that our entire value chain and production process is eco-friendly. So our value chain starts from buying the agricultural waste from the small farmers, which is traditionally burnt on site for quick turnaround of crops and to condition their soil as well, but which at the same time contributes to the devastating climate change. And after collecting the waste from the small farmers, we process our paper pulp and brown paper using 90% less water, 70% less energy compared to the current paper making process.
An environmental activist, Jodahi Bezabeh, the founder of Farm Boy Ethiopia, an initiative that promotes recycled environmentally friendly products. He said users in Ethiopia are working closely with the government in combating climate change, citing the Green Legacy project as a case in point,
which is environmental protection and youth involvement. For so many years, we have seen our older generation or the people before us working on their projects alone. So we wish to bring in various actors that are working on environmental protection, such as, for example, the scientists, the business people, the youth, the old, whoever it is that are working on environmental protection, to come together and work on such manners. So you can see on few of the projects that we have been doing, including with the government of Ethiopia, such as the Green Legacy, we have seen where our government has pushed the younger generation to start working on planting our future. So our influencers community, the word as it says, it's influencing, which is onto something that is good. E represents not only environment and earth, but also adds in Ethiopia, education and entertainment. So we're trying to focus on how we can collaborate all of such major issues in our world and how we could cater it into solving and combating the climate change.
Other participants on the part said that they are working in a climate space and discuss the state of climate action in Ethiopia, with the high-level climate action champion for COP26 Niger topping and United Nations high-level climate action champion for COP25 Gonzalo Munoz. During the discussion, Yared Aberra, who is a global youth climate leader and founder of the Youth Print, a youth-led environmental organization, says Ethiopia is leading the way in combating climate change. The event showcases opportunities available to young Ethiopians through the British Council's Climate Connection program.
Climate Action in Addis, Youth Leading the Way, was co-organized by the high-level Climate Action Champions, the British Council in Ethiopia, and the Youth Print. This dialogue highlighted the many ways in which youth in Ethiopia are leading the way in combating climate change in their country. For more details on the issue, here is Netzanet Demawos in our studio to tell us more about the webinar event. Netzanet, on behalf of our audience, thank you so much for making time to speak with us.
Pleasure.
So what have you produced from the webinar that brought together successful entrepreneurs?
So maybe you know that COP26 will be held in the UK, in Glasgow, in November. And when the UK took the presidency, one of the ambitious assessments the government put out was to make this COP26 a whole of society event and the most inclusive ever. So as part of that, what the British Council has been doing, you know, as lead up to the event was basically try and reach out to young people whose voice otherwise wouldn't get represented in those kinds of big conferences. So we've brought together these young people who have been really active in this space, doing their work, doing their own contributions to alleviate the challenges and the impact of climate change. So today's session was very much, you know, linking these young people, national heroes, with the global high-level champions who will be representing the UN, the UK in that conference. So the whole idea of today was very much, you know, creating that platform for the young people to say what they are doing and also to learn from those, global champions. And this is really what basically the British Council does. We connect people. We connect people with resource. We connect people among, one another. And that's exactly what happened today. And we believe if this COP26 is going to be any different from the previous COP meetings, I think we need to have representation of the voice of everyone, because as you know, climate affects all of us in different ways. Yeah, so we cannot leave it just only for politicians, for leaders and other people. You know, it affects everyone, so everybody's voice needs to be represented. So if there was one clear outcome from today, it was very much the young people have had their voice passed on to the champions who will be speaking on their behalf in that conference.
Interesting. How about the way forward in this platform? What does it look like?
So I think going forward, I believe, you know, the more space we give for these young people, the more difference they can make in their local communities, and the more connections we can give them to kind of, you know, be in touch with other people who are doing similar job in their respective countries. That's how we can really build up that bottom-up force for change. Because there's really a limit to what governments can do. There is a limit to what big companies can do. But if we do something, like, for example, what Ethiopia is doing with the tree planting, you know, we're mobilizing masses, isn't it? Yeah? That's the scale of effort that the situation requires. And I believe today is the beginning of that connection that they have made among themselves. We'll continue to connect them with their, for example, Kenyan counterparts, UK counterparts, Japanese counterparts. That's where we can create that movement and we can mobilize grassroots, you know, activities that will make a difference.
Great. So in your opinion, what's the expectations from the Ethiopian youth?
One, to be active. You know, you cannot leave it to the politicians to make a decision, because as I said, it is impacting everyone, you know. So I think they need to have their voices heard. They need to be active. They need to engage in this conversation. Second is they need to come together, because some of the things we've heard from young people is amazing. But the kind of ambition they have, they definitely need to join hands with other people, you know? There was one who was trying to create a three-wheeler. There was another one who was trying to improve seats, and that, you know, these are really mega projects. And these young people, they don't have the resources, they don't have the capital, they can't make it happen by themselves. So I think they need to come together, they need to find their partners and take it forward.
Netzanet Demawos, thank you so much for sharing us your insights.
Pleasure. Thank you.
I'm beginning here at the Martyrs Monument just behind me. The monument was built to commemorate the Algerians killed in the War of Independence against the French between 1954 and 1962.